Rhodesia. The very name itself is enough to spark controversy these days, whether from well-meaning loyalists whose nationalism has outlived the nation they take so much pride in, to critical political commentators who give their own thoughts and opinions on laws long since repealed, to edgy, terminally online teenage boys who know nothing more than the memes and the name. For all the discussion, arguments, and tongue flinging you see online about both the nation of Rhodesia and these days even the name Rhodes itself, few know of the nation's foundational myth. The myth that was celebrated every year as Pioneer Day. The United Kingdom as William the Conqueror at the Battle of Hastings. The United States has Washington crossing the Delaware. Rhodesia has Cecil John Rhodes and the men of the B.S.A.C. crossing into Matabele land and Mashona land. My name is Tay Nelson, and welcome to the First Matabele War. Bugger me, it's hot out there. There are some of the more left-leaning individuals out there who may take one look at this war and instantly come to the conclusion that it's yet another instance of the British Empire waging war on a defenseless and unarmed native people in an effort to trample upon their so-called traditions. And from reading the page summary of Wikipedia, that may be a similar conclusion that you come to. But if you read past the first result on Google, you'll find the situation isn't nearly as monstrous as they would have you to believe. The foundation for this war arises from the tribal politics of the region that would later become known as Southern Rhodesia and later Zimbabwe, but more specifically, the traditions and customs of the Matabele Kingdom. The Matabele, through centuries of tribal warfare, had conquered the Mashona people and had turned their once proud tribal chiefs into vassals. Now this in itself isn't much to bat an eye at. Similar things had happened all over the world, in Europe, obviously, in Asia, in Southern America, and even in other parts of Africa. Vassals aren't really that strange a thing, nor is collecting tribute from the vassals. However, the true issue is how the Matabele punished those who refused to pay tribute. British involvement truly starts with a treaty that was signed between the king of the Matabele people, King Lobengula, and 3 envoys of the Prime Minister of the Cape Colony, Cecil John Rhodes, on the 30th of October of 1888. This treaty, formerly the Rudd Concession, granted Cecil Rhodes and his soon-to-be founded company exclusive mining rights in the king's territory, crucially including Mashonaland. In exchange for these mining rights, the king received £100 every single month, which, given that it is in 1888, was quite a lot of money at the time, as well as 1,000 Martini Henry rifles and 100 rounds of ammunition for each rifle, totaling 100,000 rounds of suitable ammunition. Cecil Rhodes, having secured his concession, then took it to the British government to receive a charter. This charter, similar to that which was used to found the British East India Company, he then used to found his own company, the British South Africa Company, or B.S.A.C for short. I'm not going to be saying British South Africa Company every single time, just let me say B.S.A.C. It's important to note at this point that a lot of the more in-depth information about this conflict is spotty at best and non-existent at worst. Now, there are many who will use the lack of information to try and push their own narratives, like that King Lobengula only signed the treaty because he feared the British after what they had done in the Zulu War, or that King Lobengula and the Matabele didn't know what they were signing. They couldn't speak or understand English. How could they trick them? Now, they say these things to fit their predetermined narrative, that being that the British were evil masterminds, whilst the insert opponent here were innocent people who were taken advantage of. They didn't know what they were signing. They hadn't even considered lying before. Not only is this incredibly disingenuous and goes against the entire point of historical analysis to tell the truth, but it is so demeaning and borderline racist to assume that brown people don't know how to read. Let me spell this out to make it abundantly clear. The Matabele Kingdom, although maybe not quite as advanced as the British, was still an advanced civilization. They could read. They could understand English. There's evidence to show that they had received envoys from other European countries and other European languages, including Afrikaans and Portuguese. The British, for their part, also had an in-depth understanding of the Matabele language. There had been an English mission operating in the area since 1859, 30 years prior. And as you can probably imagine, it's going to be quite difficult to speak to someone and convince them to convert to your religion if you can't actually speak to them. The Matabele knew English, and if the king himself didn't, he almost certainly had loyal advisors and translators who aided him both with the spoken word and with the written word. And similarly, the British could speak Matabele. There was no trickery here. If there were any trickery of the English trying to pull a fast one, then why would they go through in giving the king 100 British pounds a month, 1,000 Martini Henry rifles, and 100,000 rounds of ammunition? I will not be bringing up any of these nonsensical conspiracy theories unless there's some amount of evidence to back them up, regardless of what the Wikipedia editors say. Now then, Cecil Rhodes, having successfully secured both his concession and the Royal Charter and founding the B.S.A.C, began to organize a pioneering column. And the very next year, in 1890, the pioneering column set forth for Mashonaland. This column was set out with two main objectives in mind. The first one, to lay the foundations for the mining enterprise, and the second and the more time-sensitive goal was to establish and construct a series of forts in Mashonaland to house and protect the settlers whilst laying the groundwork for the mining. Sadly, there are no plans or sketches of what these forts might have looked like. Thankfully, from descriptions and accounts, we can get an idea. Now, these weren't the large stone structures that you might be picturing, similar to, the Alamo or block houses that would come later on. Rather, these were towns, surrounded by basic defenses like palisades and cheval de frise. Think something similar to what you would see in the Americas to protect their first settlements. One of the first of these fortifications was Fort Victoria in present-day Masvingo. It was at Fort Victoria where the true barbarity of the Matabele would be brought to light. Sorry to just jump in and disrupt the flow of this entire video so far. I just thought this was too funny of a fact for me to leave out. So, Fort Victoria was actually not just the name of the fortress, but actually the city, or the city that it would become, up until the 80s when Rhodesia fell and ZANU-PF came to power. See, when ZANU-PF came to power, as many of you might be aware, after ensuring that the population was thoroughly starved, the next thing on their communist agenda was to change the names of a bunch of shit for no good reason. You may know they changed the name of the country itself from Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, to just Zimbabwe. They also changed the name of the capital from Salisbury to Harare. But they also changed the name of Fort Victoria. But Masvingo wasn't their first attempt. And I just love to imagine ZANU-PF officials going into Fort Victoria. ignoring all the blatant corruption in their own party, ignoring the starvation and the famine that was beginning to arise, and thinking, man, we really need to tackle this name, because they viewed Fort Victoria just as the way they viewed Salisbury, as an evil white settler name that doesn't truly represent the people. And so they wanted to truly represent the people, to honor them and show their respect to the people. And so they picked a local tribal name for the city. They called the city from Fort Victoria to Nyanda, which means one who has lice. And I just love the thought of them just going into the city, trying to tell the people about how much great things they're going to do, and then calling the entire city one who has lice. Now, to be fair to ZANU-PF, and I never thought I'd be saying that, they didn't actually come up with the name. They didn't set out with the goal of just insulting everyone in Fort Victoria. They did what all politicians do. They picked the easiest option. They just looked at the map, found a tribal name that was near to the city, which happened to be a mountain called Nyanda, and they just called the entire city that without bothering to check what Nyanda meant, which is a bit strange considering this was meant to be a government of the people. How do you not know the language of the people when you are meant to be of the people? Anyway, after foreseeable backlash that this got, they decided to do what they probably should have done in the first place. No, not just leaving it be because a name of a city, it had been Fort Victoria since the city was founded. No need to go mess up a good thing. No, they decided, let's just call it what the locals called the city. And the locals, it turns out, called the city two things. Fort Victoria, no, that won't do. No, we need to get rid of Fort Victoria. Or Masvingo. And so it was decided that the city would then be named for a third time, from Nyanda to Masvingo. And truly, there was no more remnants of the evil white settlers who had been there. Except Masvingo means fort in Shona. It's the same thing as Fort Victoria sans the Victoria. They spent all that time and effort and money, and all they did was insult the entire population and then translate the name. I mean, seriously, people. This is why you can't trust politicians. They don't know what they're doing, and all they do is they waste money and insult you. Sometimes, in this case, accidentally. Sometimes, in other cases, malema, on purpose. Anyway, there's my quick little fun fact history about Masvingo, Fort Victoria, Nyanda. Don't call the city Nyanda. The people will chase you out of the city if you do. Back to the video. The territories of the Matabele Kingdom in 1891 were given protectorate status by the British Crown. Now, this was both to build confidence in the settlers that no harm would befall them, and also to build confidence in the natives that they were now under Britain's protection and that they didn't need to worry. This came after minor hostilities between the British South Africa Company and Portuguese troops who had been claiming that the Matabele's control of the Mashona was unjust. Now, this all sounds very well and good and noble of the Portuguese, Britain's eternal ally. Until you realize that they had been speaking to rebellious Mashona chiefs the entire time for their own land rights. Now, I'm not going to go out there and claim, I already said I won't, I'm not going to go out there and claim that the Portuguese only did it for the land rights. Just saying you have to take into account who they sided with and maybe why they sided with them. Their intentions, who's to say? Who's to say what their intentions were? I mean, sure, King Lobengula is a tyrant, and obviously you want to go against tyrants, but at the same time, it does make it awfully easy to go against tyrants. And the people that the tyrant is oppressing are also people who are willing to give you land for free. From this point on, an important and crucial part of the puzzle is sadly missing. This is both due to being lost to time and that the Matabele didn't exactly do a great job at keeping records. Some say Britain's protectorate status was a step too far, and that it compelled, or emboldened rather, rebellious Mashona chiefs to refuse tribute, whilst others pin the blame on rogue cattle thieves from the Mashona people stealing herds of cattle from the Matabele. All we do know, however, is this. The Matabele very quickly grew very angry with the Mashona people and began a brutal campaign of punishment and retribution. Reports of massacres being done to the Mashona people at the hands of the Matabele. Men, women, and children killed. Their villages and homes burnt down. All began to slowly filter in through the various forts. Hostilities came to a head when a Matabele raiding party, seeking justice for a crime unknown, slaughtered some 400 Mashona civilians, in plain view of, or in some accounts, within the very walls of Fort Victoria itself, to the horror and to disgust of the white pioneers. Responding swiftly, the British South Africa Police, the armed guard of the B.S.A.C, demanded the Matabele raiding party withdraw from the immediate territory surrounding the fort. Soon after the raiders' refusal, shots rang out from both sides, and the pioneers were now being shot at by the very same rifles they had just 3 years prior delivered to the king. During the skirmish, the B.S.A.P successfully managed to dispatch around 40 of the raiders, whilst receiving little, if any, casualties. Cecil Rhodes, under the protectorate status which had entrusted him and the B.S.A.C with the protection of the land and the people, including the Mashona people, used this failed Matabele raid in combination with the reports of massacres going on throughout Mashonaland as casus belli to begin amassing troops and to begin drawing plans for an invasion of Matabele land, with the end goal of bringing King Lobengula to justice and ending his tyrannical reign over the Mashona people and their lands. That's all for now, I'm afraid. If you're interested in a part 2, where I cover the actual conflict itself and, of course, the Shangani Patrol, feel free to subscribe. I would really appreciate it. Likewise, if you liked the video, feel free to like the video. If you didn't like the video, feel free to leave a nasty comment down below, helps me in the algorithm. And of course, hope you're all having a wonderful day. Thank you so much for watching. God save the king! Or, I mean, technically at this time, it's technically the queen, but, God save the monarch, just make it nice and simple. God save the monarch, whoever it may be. God save them, please. Farewell.